Okay, this is just going to be a review of drawing an eyeball. We drew one last year when we did our split celebrity portraits, and I just want us to kind of practice drawing them a little bit larger. And obviously, we're only going to focus on one for this project. We're going to start off with our simple shape of just an oval. The best way to do that and to kind of control our line and try to create like those perfect shapes that we want is to rest that side of our hand on the paper, and then you can kind of hover your pencil over the paper and create that oval shape. And then when you feel like you're creating the oval shape over and over again, then you can drop your pencil down to actually draw the shape again. Remember that we will probably be erasing most of this simple shape that we're drawing, so make sure you are drawing lightly. The next thing we will do is with another simple shape, we'll kind of look at like the iris shape of our eye. And you can look at yourself in the mirror if you need some help understanding this, but for the most part, our iris kind of sits on that top line. And then for some people, it'll touch the bottom line as well, or it might have some space above that bottom line. So you can draw yours how yours looks, where it's touching either both top and bottom lines, or draw them with some space above the bottom line. We obviously don't want too thick or too dark of lines when we're doing like these simple shapes, but since our iris is kind of one of those dark spots on our eye, and it does kind of have a thicker border to it on the outside of our iris, we can kind of keep some of those shapes from us overlapping, and you don't have to erase as much. Now that we kind of have like these simple guide shapes, we can start to use those to build up like our actual shape of our eye. So you can start by drawing your top eye line. For most of us, our top of our iris is covered by our top eye line, which is why we're going to start kind of drawing it a little bit below the top of our iris. And then you also want to make sure you know which eye you're drawing. Is it your right or your left? Wherever your nose is going to be, we can kind of see like that tear duct shape. And so we kind of have to show that tear duct shape. That's one of those things, again, that a lot of people's look different from person to person. So pay attention to what yours looks like so you can kind of get like that right angle. Maybe it like droops down a little bit more for you than for the person next to you. So make sure we're just making an effort to try and draw what we look like. You should also be using that simple shape of that oval that we drew first to guide this shape of your eye. It kind of obviously starts below that guide shape that we drew, but it should follow along to that, and then your tear duct kind of goes on the outside of it, and then your bottom eye line should follow right along that bottom of our oval, and they should kind of meet in the middle on the outside. Now we can just start to clean up our drawing a little bit. We don't need all of those simple shapes that we drew at first. So we can go back and erase those, clean up to where we only have more of like our harsh lines. The one part I would keep for your guideline, that first shape, is where your tear duct kind of ends. That is helpful to kind of see like where that tear duct begins and where your eye begins. Next, we can start to look at any other harsh lines that we might have on our face before we start shading. One of these will be like our top eye crease. When our eyes open, there's a crease that kind of shows that our eye is obviously kind of sitting back into our face a little bit. This is where like you can see if you have hooded eyes or not. If you have hooded eyes, that eye crease is going to be right in line with your top eye line. If you don't have hooded eyes, you'll be able to see kind of what mine looks like here, where it's just this harsh line that goes through, and we'll add shading to that later just to help it actually look like it's kind of sitting into our face a little bit more. Then we also kind of have some eye creases below our eye too, so kind of just look at yourself in the mirror, see what eye creases you might have, some small, some might go all the way across. This just helps it look a little bit more realistic. Another line that we can add is showing that our bottom eye line does have like this thickness to it that we can see, especially when we're kind of close up to our eye. So I always like to go from my far corner and just draw a second line on top of my bottom eye line. And it'll kind of get closer to that line that you draw as you get closer to your tear duct. Now what we can start to do is just start to add that shading. So from now on, it'll kind of just be more shading and blending where we see like our highlights and our shadows in our eye. The first part that we can do, and this will be the darkest part of our entire eye besides any harsh lines, and that'll be our iris. Your irises kind of have like this thick outside ring around them. You see this better with lighter shades of eyes, but even people with like darker and brown eyes, we can still see like that outside ring. So just build up a good amount of that value on the outside of your iris because we can use that for like blending and shading too. You can also add in your pupil, which is one of those simple shapes on our eye. Obviously, it's just a circle. The size of it obviously does depend on the light or dark area that you're in. So whatever size you want to make it, just obviously don't make it too big or too small to where it's either creepy looking or just doesn't look correct. For your project, you're not going to need your pupil or too much of this iris shading. So you can kind of decide whether you want those things on there, but obviously this is just a simple eye drawing. Now that we have our pupil, we can continue shading in our actual iris. What we kind of want to do, this obviously depends on how light or dark your eye is too, so you might have it a little bit darker than mine is, but we'll just start to create like kind of a gradient from dark to light as we get closer to our pupil. And I kind of just curve my paper and turn my paper around. I try not to do too straight of lines or harsh lines, but also we can go back a little bit later and just use a blending stump to try and get rid of any harsh lines that we add. So when you go to use your blending stump, just remember that the main purpose of a blending stump is just to move graphite. It's not to like add graphite on. We already have the graphite on. We're using the blending stump to just blend any lines and smooth anything out. So if you start to use yours and it kind of looks like you're drawing with it, try and clean it off because we're really just using it to make our lines clean and have a nice blended look. Sometimes it's better to start in the lighter areas and start smoothing light to dark rather than start in the dark areas and pull too much of that dark value into our lighter values. Just once again, keep in mind that our iris is usually the darkest part of our eye. So if you already are looking at yours and it looks pretty light, just go ahead and add some like darker shades to it because this should be pretty dark on her face. Now that our iris is mostly shaded and done, we can start to add our shading to like the rest of our face. So Another harsher or darker spot of your eye is going to be your tear duct, just because it kind of is sitting farther into your eye a little bit more, and we kind of want to show that. It also is wet too, so we can add some like highlights here and there that make it look like it's more shiny and wet to it as well. Obviously, that's the place where our tears form, so it kind of always has that look to it. Then what's really important and something you want to do on your actual project too is to tone our paper. This kind of is just giving it like a solid value to it, where it's like a medium tone in between like our highlights and our shadows. So go ahead and use like the diagonal, like at your pencil at a 45-degree angle. Using your pencil at a 45-degree angle will give you like less harsh lines, which is what we want. You don't want any harsh lines that are too hard to blend out. So just add like an overall value that's not too dark, but also kind of like a lighter tone to it, to your entire paper. And we can always erase more highlights that way as well. And then you'll use a paper towel and just blend out the entire paper. You might notice that you lose some of your guidelines or your harsher lines that we should have on our paper. So just go ahead and darken up any of your lines that should be a little bit darker that maybe got blended into your background. And then the rest of our drawing is just going to be kind of adding any value, some darker areas to shade out a little bit more. So our bottom eye line kind of has like this darker look to it, but our water line should be a little bit lighter too, kind of because it is what it sounds like. Our water line is usually wet and shiny, so it should be a little bit lighter there. But otherwise, we're just kind of darkening up some areas to actually show that our eye is a sphere and it's also sitting into our face a little bit. We're going to shade the outsides of our eye. So once again, to kind of show the like depth of our eye, it'll be darkest on the outside and slowly get lighter towards our iris. We can also show that usually our eyelashes are just like the top of our eye, creates a little bit more of a shadow on the top of our eye too, so you can darken up the top of your eye more than the bottom of your eye too. Then we can just shade that out once again with your blending stump. Again, sometimes when we're adding this like value and shading out areas, we lose some of our harsh lines. So if you need to, go back and darken up any of your eye lines. The overall inside of our eye is pretty much done at this point, but what we want to do is kind of add some highlights too. If you're not sure like where these would be or what these really are, what's really helpful is if you look in the mirror and kind of look up towards the windows or the lights, you should be able to see these little light reflections in your iris. So you can kind of add those in like rectangle shapes. Some people add these in like circles or little kind of diamond shapes too. Now we can start to add some shading to more of the outside of our eye and more of like our face area outside of our eye. So we can start with our eye crease there. Just go ahead and start by adding some more graphite to this eye line or eye crease here. And we can use that to then shade with a blending stump. What's also helpful too is to kind of create like a gradient coming away from that line. Just a little one, nothing like too crazy, but just go from dark to light on both the top and bottom. Now, a lot of the rest of our shading really depends on kind of like the light source, where the light's coming from, where our shadows are. But for the most part, we have the shadow that is created by our nose. And so we kind of have to show like the darker areas closest to our nose. And then where it's lighter is kind of where our eyebrow bone sticks out in like the corner. And then also where like our cheekbone sticks out too is going to be lighter too. So we just want to kind of almost create a gradient going from our nose across to the end of our eye and even past that, showing those like darker and lighter areas. Before I keep shading too, it is going to be helpful to know like where our eyebrow is kind of on our face. If you want to feel like the bridge of your nose and up to like your eyebrow, you kind of feel like that bone that connects your eyebrow to your nose. And that's super helpful to know like where your eyebrow actually is compared to like your eye and your eye crease as well. And just add that eyebrow outline as a starting point really lightly because we don't have like a harsh line like this shows here. And then what we can do is just start add like these hair features where our eyebrow kind of shows where they start to curve around our face. And you can go ahead and like shade that in more as well too. Your eyebrow isn't going to be required on your project if you can't see it, but if you leave space above your eye where you could see your eyebrow, you do need to add it. So just go ahead and finish adding any shading you need, going from your dark to your light area. If you need to add highlights where your facial features like stick out, like I said, like right under that eyebrow bone or where your cheekbone is are lighter. So you might need to actually erase that initial tone that we added to our paper, then it's really helpful instead of blending stumps to use that paper towel to blend like our bigger areas. It also smooths it out really nicely this way too. And if you notice, because this happens a lot, once again, go ahead and add any harsh lines to areas where you might have lost them, like your eye crease or any of your eye lines as well. After we're like almost done shading, we can kind of see some of those darker areas, and we might notice that we need to darken up other areas as well that are meant to be darker. So, like I said, our irises are our darkest thing on our eyes. So, we probably want to go back and just add some darker value to that, and we can go ahead and blend that out as well. So same thing with any of our highlights that we have too. We might just have to go back and erase any highlights that we have. So that like tear duct where we want to kind of show that it's like shiny and wet. Same with our water line on our bottom line. Try and use like the very corner of your eraser, one of the erasers that has like a nice edge to it, and make it nice and light where those areas are. So our final thing that we need to add will be eyelashes. Okay, everybody does have eyelashes, so this is something that everyone will need to add. Otherwise, your eye will just kind of look naked and unfinished, as it kind of does right now. So there are some misconceptions when we're drawing eyelashes. First of all, when they're growing from our top eye line, they kind of grow straight out and then curve up. And to the best way to show that while we're drawing is to almost create like little check marks. So when you start on your top eye line, you go down and then go up. They also curve around our eye as well. So eventually when they get to like the ends, but where our tear duct is or the other edge of our eye, they are almost horizontal, or some of them are horizontal. So they're like going straight across. And that, like, they start straight up and down in the middle where our iris is, and then slowly kind of turn. And then also is for our bottom eyeline too. For your bottom eyelashes, those grow from where our waterline is. They don't grow from the edge of our eye line. So when we're drawing them on our eye, it is helpful to kind of use like our eye crease as like where should our eyelashes kind of start or end. A lot of people will exaggerate their eyelashes in eye drawings, which is fine, but just know that we still kind of want them to look realistic. They don't want to like touch our eyebrows or something. But just make sure we're following along that curve of our eye. Sometimes it's easiest to start with like the sides. Another mistake I see people make is they draw a lot of eyelashes. We don't want our eyelashes to look like ants or centipede legs. I know it's kind of a gross reference, but they'll look a little crazy. We can't see every single eyelash when we're looking at somebody's face, so drawing every single one just makes it a little crazy looking. So once you finish adding your bottom eyelashes, that will be our last little detail that we're going to add onto our eyes, and that's it.